always safeguarding the freedom, human dignity and prosperity of the brotherly Venezuelan people, as well as our determination to continue fighting against the scourge of narco-terrorism and those who contribute to its financing. The process that begins today requires the firm and coordinated commitment of all those countries that have accompanied the Venezuelan people in their long struggle, so that Venezuela can leave behind more than 2 decades of political, humanitarian and social crisis and can finally be reunited with freedom, democracy, respect for human rights and economic prosperity. Mr. President, finally, the Argentine Republic requests that the authorities responsible for administering the transition in Venezuela contribute to the immediate release of the Argentine citizen Nahuel Gallo, who has been in a situation of enforced disappearance since the 8th of December 2024, in clear violation of his human rights, and that his prompt and safe return to our country be guaranteed. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Argentina and now give the floor to the representative of Chile.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chile would like to thank Somalia for convening this informational briefing under the item Threats to International Peace and Security. We'd also like to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo, USG for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, as well as the briefings from Mr. Jeffrey Sachs and Ms. Mercedes de Freitas. President, Chile would like to express our deep concern and firm condemnation of the unilateral military action taken by the United States in the territory of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We also reiterate consistently our firm commitment to respect for international law, sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, and the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the threat or the use of the threat of force, and full respect for human rights. These affirmations are accepted by the majority, and they must maintain their importance in order to preserve international peace and security. We said this on the 23rd of December when we took the floor, and we reiterate this today. Chile does not recognize the Maduro regime, but serious violations of human rights being faced by Venezuela do not have a military solution. They can only be addressed through peaceful, gradual and inclusive measures that will take into account the legitimate aspirations of the Venezuelan people. Respect for international law does not allow for exceptions, including when it comes to addressing the illegitimacy of a president. Problems must always be solved within the normative framework that we have provided for ourselves as nations. The future of Venezuela must include free elections, citizen participation, and international assistance, and not with actions that could create dangerous precedents or escalate tensions in the region with serious consequences for the population. Chile, as a witness of history and based on our own experience with the loss of democracy, where there was foreign interference that caused extreme damage and pain for the Chilean people, we were able to recover our democracy through a transitional process that was carried out with the assistance of the international community, the strength of organized citizens, and through our institutions. Mr. President, Chile would like also to underscore the urgent need to continue with coordinated efforts multilaterally to address transnational organized crime. And we're also convinced that Latin America and the Caribbean must continue to be a zone of peace, because that zone of peace not only serves Latin America and the Caribbean, but the entire world. An armed conflict will have devastating humanitarian consequences in Venezuela and in the region. It will worsen the suffering of the civilian population and worsen even further the displacement, insecurity and vulnerability aspects of the situation. We reiterate that any differences must be dealt with exclusively through peaceful means in strict respect for international law, the sovereignty of states, and the prohibition of the use or the threat of the use of force. As was recently indicated by the heads of state of Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain, we express our concern with regard to any attempt to control government administration or foreign ownership of strategic assets. That this would be against international law and would threaten the political, economic, and social stability of the region. Mr. President, given this complex scenario, Chile welcomes the role that could be played by multilateral fora. And here, particularly, we would refer to the role of the United Nations, and particularly the role that could be played by the Secretary General and by this Council, with the consent of the parties involved to contribute to de-escalating the situation and searching for an understanding that would favor a peaceful and lasting exit to the crisis. Prudent leadership and experience of our organization, as well as the regional organizations and mechanisms, could be very relevant to avoid a further worsening of the situation and to keep open the channels of communication. Chile reiterates its preparedness to support constructive initiatives that will point in this direction and work together with countries of the region and with the international community for stability and mutual understanding and respect for the principles that underpin this organization. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Chile for the statement and now give the floor to the representatives of Brazil.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank Somalia for convening this emergency session of the Security Council. Brazil categorically and firmly rejects the armed intervention in Venezuelan territory in flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and of international law. The bombings on Venezuelan territory and the capture of its president cross an unacceptable line. These acts constitute a very serious affront to the sovereignty of Venezuela and set an extremely dangerous precedent for the entire international community. The Charter of the United Nations establishes as a pillar of the international order the prohibition of the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, except in the circumstances strictly provided for therein. The acceptance of actions of this nature would inexorably lead to a scenario marked by violence, disorder, and the erosion of multilateralism, to the detriment of international law and institutions. The effects of the weakening of international governance and cooperation mechanisms are already evident. The record number since the Second World War of 61 active armed conflicts, the unprecedented figure of 117 million people in situations of humanitarian disaster around the world, reflecting the increase in wars, displacement, and crimes against humanity, such as the genocide in Gaza, and the global increase in military spending, which is approaching the historical mark of $2.7 trillion. As Brazil has reiterated on numerous occasions, the norms that govern coexistence among states are mandatory and universal. They do not admit exceptions based on ideological, geopolitical, political, economic, or any other kind of interests or projects. They do not admit that the exploitation of natural or economic resources justifies the use of force or the illegal change of a government. The multipolar world of the 21st century, which promotes peace and prosperity, must not be confused with spheres of influence. We cannot accept the argument that the end justifies the means. This reasoning lacks legitimacy and opens the possibility of granting the strongest the right to define what is just or unjust, what is right or wrong, and even to ignore national sovereignties, imposing the decisions to be taken by the weakest. Latin America and the Caribbean have made peace a conscious, lasting, and irreversible choice. The resort to force in our region evokes chapters of history that we believed we'd left behind us and endangers the collective effort to preserve the region as a zone of peace and cooperation, free of armed conflicts, respectful of international law and the principle of non-intervention. Armed interventions in the past have had profoundly negative and lasting consequences. Contrary to freedom and democracy, those interventions produced authoritarian regimes and serious violations of human rights, leaving as a lamentable result thousands of dead, political prisoners, tortured persons and disappeared persons whose families still today search for their loved ones as well as justice and reparation. For the first time in South America, a profoundly alarming event has occurred. An external armed aggression with the deployment of troops and bombings in a neighbouring country contiguous with Brazil, with which we share more than 2,000 kilometres of border. Mr. President, South America is a zone of peace. I insist upon that. We have upheld and will uphold with full determination peace and non-intervention in our region. Furthermore, Brazil does not believe that the solution to the situation in Venezuela lies in the creation of protectorates in the country, but rather in solutions that respect the self-determination of the Venezuelan people within the framework of its constitution. The events of January 3rd transcend the regional sphere. The attack on the sovereignty of any country, regardless of the direction of its government, affects the entire international community. This and other cases of armed intervention against the sovereignty of a country, its territorial integrity, or its institutions must be vehemently condemned. It is up to this Council to assume its responsibility and react with determination, clarity and obedience to international law in order to prevent the law of force from prevailing over the force of law. Brazil trusts that the future of Venezuela will be built by the Venezuelan people through dialogue, without external interference and within the framework of international law. Thank you.
For Brazil, for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, thank you for having convened this emergency meeting of the Council. The government of Mexico has already made its position clear with regard to our condemnation of the military aggression of January 3rd against targets in the territory of Venezuela, in clear violation of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. These actions must not be allowed, as they constitute a severe blow to the Charter and to multilateralism. Mexico would like to clarify the following points. 4 points. Number 1, the prohibition of the threat or the use of force against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of any state is the foundation of international law, regardless of the country or the government involved. 2, rhetoric pointing towards the escalation or expansion of military actions, including to other countries in our region, threatens regional stability. 3, the Security Council has the responsibility and, above all, it has the obligation to act decisively and without double standards in the face of serious violations of the Charter, and to restore international peace and security in strict adherence to the provisions of Article 24 and observing Article 27.3. 4. It is for sovereign peoples to decide their destiny and to find peaceful democratic and negotiated solutions to their political differences within a framework of unrestricted respect for human rights. Regime change by external actors and the application of extraterritorial measures are not only acts contrary to international law, but historically, all they've done is exacerbate conflicts and weakened the social and political fabric of nations. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, despite the political differences among our governments, Latin America and the Caribbean has been forged as a zone of peace. Collectively, we have, for decades now, resorted to the available political and legal mechanisms available in order to peacefully settle disputes. The current violation of this fragile balance gravely endangers the political stability and the security of the region, as well as the well-being of our peoples. Those who justify these acts deny the independent history of Latin America and the Caribbean. Mexico, firm in its constitutional principles of foreign policy and its pacifist calling, emphatically reiterates that dialogue and negotiation are the only legitimate and effective ways to resolve existing differences. I reiterate the call of the President of Mexico for the UN to do more to resolve this and other conflicts, including through the good offices of its Secretary General. In view of the events of January 3rd, Mexico reaffirms its willingness to support any effort at facilitating dialogue, mediation, or providing assistance that promotes peace in the region. Finally, we cannot overlook the fact that this session of the Council has been held only now, when what we face is a serious situation that puts international peace and security at risk. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Paraguay.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. The delegation of Paraguay would like to thank the Presidency and the members of the Council for the opportunity to take the floor at this very important session. Paraguay has already pointed out the situation with regard to Venezuela under President Maduro and the Cartel de los Soles and the criminal organization that was formally declared as such by our national authorities, and his continued presence was a threat to the region. The exit of the leader of that terrorist organization should immediately lead to the restoration of democracy and to the rule of law in Venezuela, making it possible for the popular will expressed at the ballot box will be the foundation for reconstruction in Venezuela. We would also urgently call for the release of all political prisoners that are still in the prisons of that country, and we reiterate that a return to democratic institutions in Venezuela and the possibility for the legitimately elected authorities to resume their functions are fundamental steps for stability in the region. And finally, Paraguay reaffirms our historic commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes, and we would observe the current events in Venezuela, and we would urge democratic means to be given priority for an ordered transition. Our commitment will continue to be to the democratic principles of the rule of law and peace in society. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Paraguay for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Cuba.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Cuba aligns itself with the statement to be delivered by Eritrea on behalf of the group of friends of the United Nations and Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. Since September of last year, Cuba has been denouncing the hegemonic and criminal plans of the United States and its aggressive projection against Venezuela and the region. We have clearly been exposed to the serious and unpredictable consequences of the irresponsible conduct of the U.S. government for the political, social, and economic stability of Latin America and the Caribbean, and more generally, for international peace and stability. On the 23rd of December, in this very body, we set out the sequence and escalation of actions carried out by the United States with the aim of overthrowing by force the legitimate and constitutionalized our Latin American and Caribbean region for years. It seeks to promote a change in the constitutional order of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, freely chosen by its people. Its ultimate objective is not the false narrative of combating drug trafficking, but control over Venezuela's land and natural resources, as has been openly and shamelessly declared by President Trump and his Secretary of State. This is an imperialist and fascist aggression with objectives of domination that seeks to revive the U.S. hegemonic ambitions over our America, anchored in the outdated Monroe Doctrine. It also seeks to intimidate and subjugate the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean. Cuba calls for an urgent reaction from the international community against this criminal attack on Venezuela, a peaceful nation that does not attack the United States or any other country. We call on all governments, parliaments, social movements, and peoples of the world to condemn the U.S. military aggression against Venezuela and to confront this act of state terrorism that threatens international peace and security and seeks to impose a new doctrine of U.S. imperialist domination in Latin America and the Caribbean and in the world. Mr. President, the recent statements about imperialist plans to steer Venezuela toward a supposed safe, appropriate and prudent transition are totally unacceptable. In the U.S. vision of domination, this means imposing a puppet government functional to its predatory goals, particularly unrestricted access to and plundering of natural resources that, by right, belong to the Venezuelan people. Determining the destiny of Venezuela is an exclusive right of its people, without external interference. If the U.S. government, lacking any moral authority whatsoever, truly cared about the peace, freedom and justice of Venezuelan men and women, it would not have bombed that territory with absolute disregard for the lives, sovereignty and territorial integrity of that nation. I conclude by reaffirming our unwavering adherence to the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, and by calling for action with the firmness and determination that current circumstances demand, always in defense of international law and of a future of peace for all the peoples of our America and of the world. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Cuba for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Latin America and the Caribbean is a zone of peace, declared by the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, on behalf of all of the peoples and governments of our region. This zone of peace must be fully respected by all governments of the world without exception, and in particular by the members of this Security Council responsible for international peace and security. This decision, these desires and aspirations of our peoples are a noble contribution to world peace, to international law, and to the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, Nicaragua supports what was expressed by the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, calling for the immediate release of the constitutional and legitimate president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, and the first fighter of the country, Celia Flores. All member states of the United Nations have the duty to respect international law, the spirit, the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, the right to sovereignty, self-determination, territorial integrity of states, non-interference, and peaceful coexistence. The Venezuelan people are a dignified people, the people of Bolivar, of Chavez, and of Maduro, and they have never bowed the knee. They defend their right to sovereignty and their right to peace. Nicaragua will always stand with Venezuela. Peace has been deeply damaged, and the human family, the community of nations, the peoples of the world. We urge all of you to
and dismantle networks that enable transnational crime across the Americas, whose activities have had debilitating effects on the security and stability of the region. Trinidad and Tobago remains steadfast in its support of the United States of America's initiatives that strengthen regional security, reinforce the rule of law, and safeguard the well-being of our societies, the Americas. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, while valuing its long-standing and robust partnership with the United States, remains equally committed to maintaining a constructive and respectful relationship with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and continues to uphold peaceful relations with the people of Venezuela. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago wishes to underscore its long-standing relationship with both the United States and Venezuela, and stands ready to work collaboratively with all partners who share the aspiration of a safer, more prosperous and stable hemisphere. Mr. President, I thank you.
I thank the representative of Trinidad and Tobago, and now give the floor to the representative of Spain.
Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to congratulate you on assuming the monthly presidency of the United Nations Security Council and wish you every success in the discharge of your duties. I thank you for convening this important meeting, and I also extend my thanks to the Under-Secretary General and Head of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs of the United Nations, Madam Rosemary DiCarlo. Thank her for the information provided today. Spain would like to express our profound concern about what's happened in Venezuela. And as the Secretary General of the United Nations has noted, it constitutes a very worrying precedent with implications for the region and for the world. Respect for the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, particularly the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states and the prohibition of the use or the threat of use of force, is indispensable to ensure international coexistence. Spain defends the validity of the
League of Nations. The UN was created to prevent countries from resorting to conflict, to settle disputes and prohibit the use of force unless it is done in a legally prescribed manner. In doing so, the UN has played a pivotal role in ensuring peaceful existence amongst nations, including in ending the colonial subjugation by powerful countries over others, underpinned by respect for the equal rights.
Reality simply evolves into a change from one crisis to another, one crisis replacing another. There can be no genuine transition with Madurismo if it remains, or if we have the same power structures preserved under new names. Any arrangement that keeps figures associated with the repressive apparatus at the center of governance would, in practice, constitute continuity of the system and not a real transition. Comparative experience shows that merely nominal transitions tend to prolong conflicts, intensify migratory flows, and perpetuate regional instability to the detriment of international peace and security. Panama will always stand in solidarity with an orderly and democratic transition process, anchored in the popular will already expressed at the polls on July 28, 2024, aimed at restoring democratic institutions through an interim period strictly limited in time, the sole purpose of which is to create the conditions necessary for the effective exercise of the Venezuelan people's right to self-determination. As a country that recovered its democracy and sovereignty, Panama can state clearly that there can be no peace without legitimacy, nor legitimacy without democracy, and that every democracy is ultimately based on respect for the popular will. Mr. President, Panama, due to our commitment to multilateralism and international law, in its capacity as member of the Security Council, will continue to contribute responsibly to collective efforts aimed at preserving peace, strengthening democracy, and supporting legitimate and sustainable solutions anchored in the sovereign will of peoples and respect for international law. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Somalia on assuming the presidency of the United Nations Security Council in January, and wish you all success. Latvia takes its seat on the Council with a profound sense of honor and responsibility for this role. And let me thank Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for today's briefing on behalf of the Secretary General, and I thank the invited briefers. The Security Council bears primary responsibility for the global efforts to uphold peace, security, and rule of law worldwide. Latvia recalls that under all circumstances, the principles of international law and the UN Charter must be upheld. All efforts now focus on ensuring de-escalation and stability in Venezuela based on inclusive dialogue and broad societal support. Latvia encourages all relevant actors to prioritize diplomatic efforts and work collectively towards a peaceful, democratic, and sustainable future for Venezuela. Latvia stands in solidarity with the people of Venezuela and their right to freedom and democracy, rights that were not respected by the Maduro regime during 2024 presidential elections and before, and which remain unmet to this day. The regime of Nicolás Maduro was rooted in mass repression, corruption, organized crime, including drug trafficking, and posed a grave threat to security of the region and the world. It has repeatedly violated the UN Charter and undermined international law, including through open support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The Maduro regime does not represent the will of the Venezuelan people and has relied on widespread, systematic repressions of human rights across the country to maintain power. 8 million Venezuelans have been forced to flee the country since 2014. Latvia also remains committed to working jointly together with partners to counter global transnational organized crime networks, including in Latin America and Caribbean. Such criminal activities place the lives of countless people at grave risk, particularly women and children. Addressing these challenges requires sustained cooperation in full respect of international law. Latvia continues to closely monitor the situation in Venezuela and stands prepared to continue working with its partners to support a peaceful, democratic, and just transition that reflects the aspirations of the Venezuelan people. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Undersecretary General DiCarlo for her briefing on behalf of the Secretary General. We also listened carefully to the briefing by Ms. de Freitas and Mr. Sachs. Mr. President, Denmark joins the Secretary General in expressing deep concern over the evolving situation in Venezuela. Since this Council met to discuss the situation 2 weeks ago, we have seen a drastic escalation, culminating in a large-scale military operation on January 3rd. At our last meeting, Denmark urged all actors to strictly adhere to international law and to de-escalate tensions and exercise the necessary restraint. Today, we echo the Secretary General in his concern regarding the worrying implications of this military action. Independent of the situation in Venezuela, these developments constitute a dangerous precedent. International law and the UN Charter, as a pillar of the international security architecture, must be respected by all states. Denmark recalls the foundational principle of international law that forbids states from threatening or using force against another state's territorial integrity and political independence. This imperative is enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Members of the UN Security Council have a special responsibility to uphold these principles. The principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity must be respected. The inviolability of borders is not up for negotiation. These are universal, sacrosanct principles enshrined in international law. They apply everywhere. Mr. President, once again, Denmark calls on all parties to urgently de-escalate tensions that could threaten peace and stability in the region and beyond. International disputes should be settled by peaceful means, as stated in the UN Charter. We further call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to engage in dialogue and diplomacy. Denmark takes note of official statements from the United States government stating that the military operations are to combat drug trafficking and stem the illicit flow of illegal narcotics. Denmark shares the priority of combating organized crime and drug trafficking, while reiterating that counter-narcotic efforts, as all other efforts, must be conducted in strict accordance with international law, including the fundamental rules and principles of the UN Charter. Mr. President, against this backdrop, Denmark wishes to recall our solidarity with the people of Venezuela. Denmark does not recognize Nicolás Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela following the lack of transparency and integrity in the 2024 presidential elections, which failed to meet basic democratic standards. In Maduro's attempts to cling to power, his authoritarian regime grew increasingly oppressive. His regime bears responsibility for widespread and systematic violations of human rights against his fellow citizens, and he should be held accountable. The victims of the Maduro regime's alleged crimes against humanity have to be heard. The Venezuelan people have a right to democracy and self-determination exercised through peaceful, inclusive, and credible democratic processes, free from fear of political persecution, intimidation, or repression, and external political interference. This includes the rights of Venezuelans alone to determine their political, economic, and social future without coercion, pressure, or manipulation by external actors. No state should seek to influence political outcomes in Venezuela through the use or threat of force or through other means inconsistent with international law. Venezuela's future can be decided only by the Venezuelans. We call on all parties and stakeholders to come together for a negotiated and peaceful transition to democratic rule in a process led by and owned by Venezuelans. At this critical and uncertain time, it is imperative that all parties fully respect human rights and international law. Denmark remains committed to supporting Venezuela and the aspirations of its people on his path to lasting political stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I congratulate Somalia on the assumption of the presidency of the Council for the month of January. And I thank our briefers for their remarks. Colleagues, the Venezuelan people have suffered for years. This Council now meets at a pivotal moment for Venezuela's future. Maduro's actions created extreme levels of poverty, violent repression, and failing basic services. His regime's rule precipitated a displacement crisis affecting the whole region. The United Kingdom has long been clear that Maduro's claim to power was fraudulent. To date, Venezuela's National Electoral Council has failed to publish the full results of the July 2024 presidential elections, and independent domestic and international reports also observed significant irregularities and a lack of transparency. President, the United Kingdom wants to see a safe and peaceful transition to a legitimate government that reflects the will of the Venezuelan people. They deserve a government which reflects their vote at the ballot box and delivers a more stable, prosperous future for all Venezuelans. Finally, President, the United Kingdom reaffirms its commitment to international law and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. These foundations are essential for maintaining global peace, security, and the rule of law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, I wish to congratulate you upon your presidency of the Security Council during the month of January. I also wish to thank Madam Rosemary DiCarlo for having conveyed to us the information from the Secretary General of the United Nations on the recent developments which have taken place in Venezuela. Mr. President, France has continued to stand in solidarity with the Venezuelan people as they face the crisis that has been plaguing them for far too many years. Specifically, and in particular, since the summer of 2024, on the 20th of July, 2024, the Venezuelan people exercised their right to vote peacefully in order to shape the future of their country. Their right to choose their leaders, nonetheless, has been stripped away from the people by Nicolás Maduro. Must we recall the facts? The electoral process has been was marred by numerous irregularities, and the final counting of votes was marred by a flagrant lack of transparency. In light of the democratic aspirations of the Venezuelan people, Nicolás Maduro has systematically responded with the repression of dissident voices, of members of the opposition, and of civil society, as well as with numerous arbitrary detentions. France has always expressed itself with clarity about the fact that these practices are unacceptable and that respect for human rights must be upheld. Mr. President, the military operation which has led to the capture of Nicolás Maduro runs counter to the principle of peaceful dispute resolution and runs counter to the principle of non-use of force. The proliferation of violations of the Charter of the United Nations and of violations of international law by states vested with responsibility as permanent members of the Security Council chips away at the very foundation of the international order. Contravening the principles of the Charter, including the principle of respect for independence and the territorial integrity of states, undermines the foundation of the United Nations and weakens international peace and security. France remains faithful and committed to respect for the Charter of the United Nations and of the principle of peaceful dispute resolution. We have an obligation to uphold these principles at all times and in all places. Respect for these principles is indispensable. Mr. President, France wishes to reiterate our commitment to respect for the will of the Venezuelan people. The transition which is currently being opened up for Venezuela needs to be peaceful and democratic and